communication. How clear is your communication? Do you say what you are intended to say, or does it sometimes just get mixed up? How clear are you, especially for people that own businesses or in the workplace in general? How clear is that communication? Are you able to understand and be understood?
Mhm.
That's our topic for today. I'm your interim host, Teresa Palmer. I'm a holistic cardiology nurse practitioner. And for over 30 years, I've been dealing with communication because when I'm dealing with my patients, has to be very clear. Has to be very clear as to what we are going to do, what is the plan, what am I hearing from you, and is that accurate, what I'm hearing from you? And I have someone with me today, a fellow colleague from the Own It family, and I will let her introduce herself. But I just want to say one more thing. I think there's three things that interfere with our clarity of communication. And I'm saying them in my own order, what I think the order of importance is. And number one, I think, is AI. I think that we hand a lot of what we could be saying over to AI. And AI is simply a computer. That's all it does, is it spits out information. So it may not always be what you intend it to be and say. And the second is, I think we put too much on our plates. And I think we see that with scheduling things like podcasts, things like that, where we leave it up to, again, AI, somebody else to schedule for us. We don't really look at things all the time. We're not really clear about where we're going with something, because a lot of times we're busy, we just want to get it off our plate. And I think then communication suffers. And the third, and this is a little bit delicate, but I think it's something that we all have to be aware of, and that's language barriers. Because there are language barriers, and it doesn't matter if you're learning a new language, if you speak other languages, and if you're in a country where you have to utilize another language. It's so important not only to be able to speak in that language, to say the words, but to be able to be understood, and also for the person to be able on both ends to comprehend or understand what is being said. And with that, I will turn it over to Jacqueline. I will let her introduce herself and we will get the conversation started.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much, Teresa. It is always a pleasure to be with you on the platform. So thank you so much for having me today. And as she said, I am Dr. Jacqueline Brown. I am your sovereign leadership architect. I am the leader that goes deeper, not just the surface level. Why? Because leadership is not about being the boss who gives the orders, who's in charge. But leadership, really good leadership, is having the ability to influence others without authority, to be able to make that impact in the world when no one necessarily has to do what you are suggesting or even saying. So let's get with this communication today, because I love this, Teresa. Thank you so much for this topic. And as you said, communication is not just speaking clearly. There's something that is done very often that people believe is a compliment. But depending on the lens you're receiving it from, or the lens it's being given, it can be insulting. And that is, oh, you speak so well. You are so articulate. And sometimes that's stated as if they don't really expect for you to be articulate in what you're saying. So sometimes it can come across so insulting. But it's not just about speaking, it's about being understood accurately. So I'm going to start with, when we're communicating, are we communicating where we're being understood accurately? And are we holding ourselves accountable for being understood accurately? Many times we assume communication has happened because we've spoken some words or we sent an email. We're quick to say that when someone says, well, I didn't know that. Well, I said it on the last call. Well, I put it in an email. I sent you an email. Well, the instructions were given. But true communication requires connection and clarity. You got to have a connection because sometimes you can be emailing, you can be speaking, you can be giving instruction. And guess what? People are tuning you out. Now, in some cases, they're going to do that anyway. But our accountability is to make sure that we are doing everything that we're supposed to make sure that one, we've made a connection so that people haven't checked out to what we're saying. Two, we are being crystal clear. There is clarity in what we are saying, meaning there's no ambiguity. There's no just, okay, I throw a sentence out there. It's very ambiguous and it really has no meaning or no meat, as we can say, behind it. And then there is the part of confirmation when we're communicating. And that's the active listening part. When I was going for my coaching certification and I went through the International Coaching Federation. I wanted to go through something that was internationally recognized and had a lot of credibility to it. And during that time, I noticed that the curriculum spent a lot of time on active listening. And I was like, wow, are we ever going to get past active listening? But that's very important when you're doing any type of counseling or coaching. So, as leaders, I believe we have to ask ourselves, Teresa, did I say what I meant? That's big. Did I really say what I meant? And did the other person understand what I meant? Did I listen to understand, or did I listen only to respond? And Teresa, I know you're going to be able to jump on that one because that's a lot of times where the heart comes in. Did I listen to understand, or am I just, because if I'm listening to understand, I'm listening with my heart. If I'm listening just so that I can respond and just so I can be the right person in the room, well, that may not be so good. Did my tone,
I still can't hear.
my timing, my body language, and my word of choice, the words that I chose to speak, did they support the message that I want to deliver, or did they just confuse people? Because clear communication requires emotional discipline. Sometimes the message is right, but the delivery creates resistance. Sometimes the intention is good, but the words are rich and unclear. Sometimes they're shaped in frustration. And that is why active listening is so important. Listening allows us to hear not only the words, but the concern, the confusion, the hesitation, or the need beneath the words. So, Teresa, I believe communication is leadership responsibility. And when we communicate, we are not just transferring information, but we're building trust. We're reducing confusion. We have to go into a conversation with that in mind, creating alignment with the people that we want to work with or we want to work with us. And I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, before I have my next guest introduce herself, I just want to build on that a little bit. I think it's so important that you follow up. When you have a communication, it's so important that you follow up. And especially if that communication isn't a one-on-one with a person, like you said, an email, a text, anything like that. It's just, I can't stress enough how important it is to have that human connection. And that human connection comes from the heart and it comes from the brain. So you could take something like AI, and the AI is simply a brain. And I know a lot of people, I've had so many appointments, and, doctor's offices, everything, where now everything is AI. Or you're trying to get an appointment scheduled. I live in a gated community. People have to come in a certain way. Well, AI does not allow me to say that, because all AI does is take down the information. And then the person tries to get through the wrong gate that's only for residents, a back gate. Then they have to go all the way around, and then they're frustrated. And then they don't even want to do your service because they feel they're getting the runaround. Well, they're really not getting the runaround. What happened was I had to deal with AI. They cut me off as soon as they got your name, your address, what time, boom, they cut you right off. So I think we always have to be aware of that and always keep that human touch. And even if it's more expensive, companies I deal with and offices I deal with still have somebody that answers the telephone. They may give you the options with the AI, but you could still get through to somebody. And again, that is, I can't stress enough how important it is. And listening with our heart, being able to really take in that information and being able to say when we don't understand it. I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying. Could you please clarify that for me? Or what I heard was blah, blah, blah. Is that the entirety of what was being said, or have I missed something? Or just asking somebody to even repeat something. There's nothing wrong with that. I didn't hear you clearly. I didn't understand it clearly. Could you please repeat what you said, or repeat it back to the person? Okay, you are coming at such and such a time at this location, correct? And then the other person could correct that. But now I will turn it over. We have our other guest here, Marissa, and I'll let her introduce herself and she could join in the conversation. I just want to say we are ending promptly at the 30-minute mark because I do have another commitment today. Okay. So with that said, let me turn it over to Marissa.
Well, that makes it very obvious in the room that we can talk. And so that's a clear communication in saying, hey, cutoff time is cutoff time, which is perfect because I'm dressed and ready to go to the gym myself. I want to chime in on, I love this platform. Those who are in the audience, they already know who pretty much I am. So I just want to dive right into the conversation because in preparation, I like to be prepared. So in preparation, and I'm big on communication. I'm big on heart communication. I'm big on emotional intelligence and connectivity. You always hear me say LMX, leader member exchange, and POS, perceived organizational support. It's imperative that we master the art of communication, and not only the art of communication from the leadership side, but also too from the subordinate side, right? So those followers need to be held accountable because leaders are not trying to lead dependents. Their desire is to cultivate, develop, and help to flourish other leaders. It's your life, own it. It's about taking responsibility of owning yourself. That means that when someone is speaking, have the respect and consideration, and especially if you want results out of that conversation, to listen effectively. So clear communication is not only the art of speaking, but also the art of receiving. You have to be one who is open to receiving. What happens a lot of time is not poor or inefficient clear communication. It is ineffective, non-focused listening, because you can, if you are communicating nonstop clearly, but the listener is not listening clearly, in lies your gap. So we can't just focus on delivery. We also must have a balance and focus on reception. Are you listening to the clear communication? Or are you listening from a point or a perspective that's already predestined? You already feel like you know what the person is going to say. So you're not really listening effectively. So that's a part of the dynamic of the conversation that I want to focus on. As a leader myself, I believe that I have a tendency to communicate clearly. And so in meetings, I always stop myself because I'm a bullet. I come out the chamber ready to go. And I am self-aware enough of that I slow myself down through self-regulation and say, "What, Marissa, dial it back because you move quickly." You have to make sure that as you're moving, those who are under you or following you can actually run with you, that you don't leave them behind in confusion. But what I have learned, and many can attest to this, after the end of any meeting, I'll say, does anybody have any questions about Jack? Or anybody have any questions? And the answer is no. Marissa, you've articulated this clearly. But oftentimes what happens after a meeting is that I get all of these messages. Marissa, did you say blah, 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 blah. Marissa, did you say blah, 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 blah. And so we have to learn how to listen effectively. And in the moment, ask to have the courage, because a lot of times when people are not receiving information accurately, it's because they don't have the courage to ask the questions. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. We are not creating environments that foster the ability for someone to feel safe in asking questions that may be looked upon as less than knowledgeable, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't want to feel inadequate, so you just don't ask the question, right? And so it wasn't that information was not conveyed clearly. It was either you did not have the courage to ask questions for further clarity, or you just didn't have the courage to ask questions that on areas that were not touched and may not be the most popular point of the conversation, right? So we have to, and I love this about It's Your Life, Own It, is because we have to own that. We have to own our own inadequacies. We have to own our selfishness, because sometimes we're listening to a conversation and we're listening to it for our own advantage, so that we could rebuttal. So we're not really listening to everything because we just have our position and what we want to say. And so by the time that person finishes talking, you really didn't listen to what they were saying, because if you did, your response wouldn't be the response that you had, because you would have known already in that part of the conversation that what you're asking for has already been addressed. And so sometimes we need to have a balance to things, and we need to make sure that we value when a person is speaking, that we respect whether we agree with them or we don't agree with them, that we respect the content of what their delivery is. We don't always have to love the messenger, but we better be paying attention to the message. And so that's what I have to offer. And I'm being quiet. I'm going to be quiet at this point so we can end on time.
I just wanted to build on that a little bit, and I'm going to build on it with language barriers, because I think it's something that we all have to deal with in all parts of the world. And an example I'll use is that I joined a French Toastmasters club. Well, I'm a public speaker. I've been speaking for over 20 years. I do it well in English, but in French, it's a different story. And a lot of times, I think that we want to think that we know more about that other language than we really do. So, for example, in Toastmasters, somebody may take on a role of evaluating a speaker. Well, if they can't fully comprehend the French language and they don't have command of all those words, of the expressions, of the typical expressions that are used in French, you can't give somebody a good evaluation. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe that we shouldn't be taking on roles if we can't deliver it effectively. Now, others in Toastmasters, there's others in my club that say, well, some people are learning. Yeah, well, I'm learning too, but I'm not going to subject somebody else to having a poor evaluation, giving a poor response, me trying to figure out grammar in another language and try to tell people who are up there speaking because they want to give these presentations elsewhere.
Right.
If I can't be effective with them and give them feedback that matters to them, I have done nothing for them. So that's what I have to say about language barriers. Not that we shouldn't use other languages, not that we're not a melting pot, but please, I think we all need to be careful that, how well do we really understand that language? How well are we really coming across in that language? Are we saying what we mean to say, or should we switch back to our home language, our primary language? And, say, like I say in Toastmasters, I cannot do you justice evaluating your speech in French. I can do it in English because I want to make sure that you get the valuable feedback. There's no harm in that. What is the harm in that? Instead of me trying to act or not realize that I don't know everything about that language and I can't effectively speak and be understood in that language. So that's what I wanted to say about a language barrier. It's not that we use other languages, that's fine, but I think it's knowing your own limitations and asking for help if you truly don't understand something. And, I was talking backstage that there was a language barrier. I had some work done. Unfortunately, it was my air conditioner. It was hot and humid. The person that came, there was a language barrier. And the person, unfortunately, told the insurance company something that wasn't right. And the insurance company temporarily canceled our claim. And it took another 2 days in the hot, humid weather to get that settled. The person never understood. Person said to me, well, I speak good English. I said, but I didn't understand what you said. The insurance company didn't understand what you said, and it caused a big problem.
Right.
Well, the person didn't think that it did. The person said, oh, people just like to criticize my language. No, they don't. It's because they don't understand. And if you're going to be in your business, and this was a solo business owner, well, then you need to either get better with that language or use a translation tool where you could, write down on your phone, you could speak it, that phone could translate it. And then the other person has a good understanding of what is going on. So with that, we have about, what do we have here left? We have 6 minutes, 5 minutes actually. So let me go back to Jacqueline. And what do you have to add, or what would be your final words on this?
I would say that very often people look at communication as being a soft skill. And I will step out the box because we do need to come out of some of these boxes. Everything that we have read in a book doesn't necessarily serve where the world has evolved to today. And I would say that communication is no longer just a soft skill to acquire. It really goes deeper into internal governance, because what we are doing internally is going to better help us to communicate. And that goes back to that active listening that I was talking about, and Marissa touched on in great detail and made some excellent points. Before communication ever comes out of our mouth, it has to first pass through our internal world, our thoughts, our emotions, our assumptions. Marissa talked about sometimes, are you listening, and I said this, are you listening to understand, or are you listening to respond? Or are you listening for what your trigger is? Our confidence. Are we listening for wounds? Or are we listening to discipline ourselves internally so that we can have this two-way conversation to avoid misunderstandings? So as a sovereign leadership architect, I teach leaders to re-engineer your internal world so that leadership becomes aligned intentionally. We're making transformation, and we're able to do that through effective communications, because unclear communication can often lead to some really situations that may or may not be able to get resolved. Sometimes some things just don't get resolved and they just stay out there. And if we want to avoid that, we want to make sure we're doing everything that we can internally. And that's it.
Okay. And Marissa, any final words from you?
Yeah, I just want to say just 2 points I want to make. Is one, always be open. There's so much in life that we can experience, and no, we're not experts coming out the door. So for me, I would say be open, even if you're at the beginning of learning another language or learning anything. You know, proficiency comes over time. It's not going to ever, and you're never going to be absolute in any of it, right? So that's what I would say there. I say you will miss out on experiencing life if you limit yourself. So I would just say, you know, it's your life, own it. So do what you want to do, boo. But I will say this on the other side to this is that there is different communications in different languages. So the insurance company has a language. Now, as a solo entrepreneur, business owner, if you're going to be dealing with insurances, you got to learn how to speak their language, their language. You got to learn how to speak their language. That's critically important for your customers, right? You want to keep your business growing. You want to learn the corporation's language. Each corporation, each company has their own language. Why? Because they have their own procedures and their own policies. And you have to understand that language if you're going to be successful. And that's what I would just say. Remember, the communication is not always words. It's language, and language varies between what entity you're working with, whether it's people and different ethical languages, or it's companies and their language based on their policies. And so I leave with that.
Thank you so much. And we're going to end here. I thank everybody for the people that are listening and watching at this time, and those that will listen and watch the replay. Thank you so much for supporting the Own It platform. And as always, our intention is not to be the experts, but to give you some insight. Take what resonates with you and leave behind what doesn't. So I hope we gave you some insights today on clear communication and how important it really is to be able to say what you mean to say, to be able to understand from both ends, and for the other person or people on the other end to have active listening. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a good start to your week.
I